prevalence of teenage motherhood recorded a decline from 19% to 11% since Zonal Dissemination of Ghana 2022 Demographic and Health Survey. These statistics highlight a complex landscape of adolescents' pregnancy and motherhood with significant regional variations. The Ashanti region is the second highest with 24% of adolescent pregnancies. The dissemination of the 2022 Demographic and Health Survey assembled health experts, district and assembly health executives to discuss the implications of the health survey numbers. Sarah Wood is the head of the Social Statistics section at the Ghana Statistical Service.
For the teenage pregnancy for women aged 15 to 19 years, you realize that for Ashanti region is 24%. And even for the other regions too, it's not the best that within that age period we should be having women or young women being pregnant or giving birth. So it's something that is worrying that policymakers will have to do something about.
The Ghana 2022 Demographic and Health Survey is a population-level survey designed to monitor and assess progress in the utilization and management of healthcare services across all 16 regions of the country. The 5-week dissemination exercise focused on data generated from 15 target areas including child health, malaria, infant and child mortality, HIV/AIDS and health insurance. Other exploits include marriage and sexuality, fertility, family planning, household water and sanitation, women's empowerment, domestic violence and agency, consent and cohesion. Director of Regional Offices of the Ghana Statistical Service, Emmanuel George Osei, says the report will provide a vital source of information for the Ministry of Health, enabling the measurement of outcome and impact of health programs.
The Ghana Health Service and the ministry uses our demographic and health survey report a lot. As for that one, I can attest to that. They use it a lot to guide them in their policy formulation and then evaluations regarding health issues in the country. So it is one document that the Ghana Health Service and then the ministry uses a lot for policy evaluations.
Thank you very much. Reporting for JoyNews, Clinton Yabua.
Welcome back on the AM show. It's time now for us to turn our attention to teenage pregnancy with some worrying statistics. Now, data from the Ghana Statistical Service shows about 15.2% of female adolescents in Ghana aged between 15 and 19 have ever been pregnant. Now, aside these worrying figures, the question of why this issue keeps recurring is a problem, and the regional disparities are striking, with teenage pregnancy rates ranging from 6% in Greater Accra region to 26% in the Savannah region. The report we just watched indicated that 24% was recorded in the Ashanti region. I'm joined via Zoom by Caesar Kaba Gokozika, who's a health economist and development consultant, to get into the nitty-gritties of this issue. Thank you so much, Caesar, for joining the conversation. Welcome on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the team for having me.
Right. So let's begin with a simple question. Why we know that when you talk about adolescents, it's between the ages of 10 and 19. And then we are saying that globally, there's about 1.2 billion adolescents worldwide. Out of this number, about 1.5% or 15% are adolescent girls in Ghana who get pregnant at some point between these ages. What is accounting for this menace?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to the team for putting together this conversation in a very timely kind of intervention towards the International Women's Day celebration that we seek to mark, to once again explain and keep talking about the fact that women really have an important role to play in our development as a nation and as a globe. And that is why when we see statistics like this, it's quite worrying, especially for a country that has women as its majority. We want to see them in a place that they can continue to support the development of our nation. And let me just start by saying that, like we know, pregnancy, whether it's with a teenager or an adult, is basically caused by unprotected sexual intercourse between a male and a female, generally. And now the question really is, why will young people of the ages of 15 and 19 go on having unprotected sex and end up becoming pregnant? And like you mentioned yourself, the statistics are quite worrying. 15% as a national average, but it is quite instructive to note that there are many more regions that have higher rates than the 15, like the Ashanti region that has above 20, I think 22 or 24% already, meaning the rate is quite spread across the country with different rates. But to say that when these people get pregnant, they drop out of school, they are unable to pursue their life goals, they become a burden to society, and sometimes it has health implications, so some of them die out of these issues. But now to the question you asked, the reason young people may be having unprotected sex, like you may know, is that we have diverse pull factors, if you want to call them. But one of the key factors is that the psychological and physiological makeup of young people is that they are curious individuals. And we all grew up. We know that at a certain age, we want to figure out what is happening with our bodies. We want to understand what is going on in our system. And so they go on exploring. And so a lot of the time, it is not because they are bad people, but because they are still growing and trying to figure out what is happening to their system. They end up having certain engagements and friendships that lead them to those things. And so if they happen to do that with limited information, then it's a disaster. Because like we often say, when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, it's actually what you do not know that kills you, and not what you know. And so when they are informed, they are better placed to make decisions. Unfortunately, because of the social and the norm system in our communities, we are unable to have conversations about sex with our young people. And so they go on learning for themselves, and it becomes dangerous if they happen to do that with an unprotected sexual intercourse, and they end up becoming pregnant. But there are also the socio-economic elements of things. I usually depict it very simply by saying that young people in certain parts of our country, for instance, still have sexual intercourse with men in order to buy sanitary pads to go to school. Some of them are still having sexual intercourse with male partners in order to feed. And the economic implications of our current state means that the concept of intersectionality, like we know, usually says that anything that affects the general population may even affect women and young girls in multiple folds because they are more vulnerable. And so these economic factors mean that a lot of these young people may go on not because they want to have sex, but do it because of survival. And we had sex for fish in some parts of this country where young girls are having sex for these things. But there's also another worrying element that we still at this age see so many young girls giving out for marriage by their families, or sometimes going into marriage, arranged marriages in certain parts of our country. So we still have child marriages going on. And once a young lady gets married, the next thing by her partner will be to probably have sex with them and lead them to get pregnant, but also the limited access to contraception. So all of these things, like I said, we know that our social system and social protection system is not so effective. And so young girls have their lives in their own hands. However, the tools they need to protect themselves from teenage pregnancy, information services in terms of contraception, are sometimes not available to them or within their reach for so many reasons. And so they end up having unprotected sex and get pregnant. So there are so many implications that lead them to these things. Yeah.
These are the numbers, the age range that these pregnancies are occurring is worrying. Again, I keep saying, because the laws of Ghana say that knowing or any sexual relations with a child below the age of 16 is defilement, is a crime. So if 15-year-old children are getting pregnant, who do we hold accountable for this? Who are the men sleeping with these 16, 15, below 16-year-old girls, impregnating them and letting them go through all the effects that these pregnancies come with? And how do we trace them and ensure that they are brought to justice? Because it's a crime.
Thank you very much. And your ending statement is quite instructive. It's a crime. And once a crime is committed in any form, the state takes interest. We know that it is the reason why when thieves are arrested in our communities, they have attorneys. The government and social systems, the police take them to court for prosecution. It's the same for the young girls. So really the question is, why are we not seeing the people who impregnated young ladies below the 15-year-olds in court? Why are we not seeing them?
So why are we not seeing them?
And
where are they?
It will be an interesting question, but one of the things I mentioned in my introductory statement is that our social protection systems are not effective. And it is something we can't run away from, in the sense that we have instances where these young people do not even make it known, or they don't even get the light that they are below the ages and they got impregnated by someone. But there are also instances where they are taken to court or taken to the state institutions, and our social system go asking that the cases be settled at home. And so there are multiple implications that a young girl whose justice relies on the effectiveness of the system tends failing them by asking for an out-of-court settlement, or some instances it may not even get to court, or if you don't have a good lawyer and you can't pay for, then you may not get your case as you want it, and you always hear the wheels of justice run slowly. So there are so many things. And so even for me as someone in the space of reproductive health, we have to strengthen our social justice systems to pick these issues up. But how do we identify them? Majority of women pregnant, young or old, go for antenatal services. How do we ensure that these initial contact persons at the health system pick the cases up, report to the social justice institutions, and we pick the cases up for prosecution? That's the first entry point. And then when these things are done, we discourage our social fabric, which we have chiefs, religious leaders, opinion leaders involved, sometimes asking for people to be rescued and not be sent to jail. We encourage them to allow these people be used as examples to stop these things from happening. But for me, we must stop them in the first place. And stopping the teenage pregnancies means inform the young people about their sexual and reproductive health, because their lives, because of the ineffectiveness of our systems, is now in their hands. Let them be equipped to protect themselves. Let them know where to report. Let them know how to engage in other activities and not sex if they can abstain. And if they can't, where they can get the services to protect themselves from teenage pregnancy. Because really, regardless of the justice you get for teenage pregnancy, you cannot rescue or repair a teenage pregnancy case. A young person who gets pregnant. Whether you prosecute the person involved or not, the implications are still dire, and the person may still drop out of school. So really, let's prevent them in the first place. Yeah.
Now let's talk about some of the effects that teenage pregnancy has on these young girls mentally, physically, in terms of education and all that. We know that even their bodies are not developed well enough to handle the changes that pregnancy comes with. What are some of the effects that these young girls, or what are some of the effects that teenage pregnancy have on the life of these young girls, so we can take it from all aspects: education, social, psychological, and health?
Thank you very much. And Let me begin, like you said, to say that the effects are diverse from personal, community, as a country. We all bear the consequences of every single teenage pregnancy that occurs. And it is a reason we must take interest. First of all, like you mentioned, young people of their age are not really fully developed to carry pregnancy. And women themselves who have carried pregnancy will tell you that even for them developed, it is not an easy issue. And even the men who are married to pregnant women end up complaining that they are also in distress. And so now imagine a pregnancy in a young lady who lives alone without their partner, who has no social protection system, who in their own homes have to shut their feelings because nobody sent them to be pregnant. And so they are unable to express their emotions. And so the psychological effects cannot be underestimated. It's a lot of tension. They cannot even go to anyone to complain, because even to voice it out alone could have been a major way of ventilating to try and get it down, but they cannot even complain about the situation they find themselves in. So you see them isolated, stigmatized in communities, because once you get pregnant, it is an indication that you've had sex. And that alone, the judgment that you receive from society is not easy. But beyond that is that we see rates of maternal deaths and we try to manage it as a country. Once people's systems are not developed enough and they go into labor, the risks of labor become even multiple folds for young ladies like that, because their systems are still growing and not ready for that. And so a lot of the time, bleeding related issues can even lead to death because they are still very not mature to do a certain thing, and it's not an easy issue. But there's also the educational bit, that we have majority of our population being female. We continue to advocate, and going into the International Women's Day, to say that these women must take a seat at the development conversation tables. They must drive conversations because they also understand issues and they have experiences. They can shape policies. However, if we keep getting them pregnant, then their education is interrupted. Then we tend to complain that we don't have a lot of females in parliament, a lot of managing directors are males, and all of these people keep dropping through. So you can just say that maybe the next president who would have been a female probably dropped out of school due to teenage pregnancy in a certain village, and they are unable to climb the ladder to become what they are supposed to. But there's also the other element of the community and the country. The truth is that poverty has different causes. But once we keep raising dependency rates, then we cannot get to where we want to. Because if we want to be self-reliant as a nation, then we must have people who are self-reliant. The human beings in the system must be self-reliant. And a young girl who drops out of school due to teenage pregnancy has to rely on someone else for feeding, has to rely on the social protection system, has to rely on a man maybe who has to work and share his limited income with the family, who will now be 3 rather than 1. And so there's a whole level of implication for our country. And at the end of the day, we need interventions like free senior high school, because there will still be so many people who cannot pay for their school. There will be so many people who cannot pay for healthcare. And there are so many other implications that come with teenage pregnancy and poverty. But also the fact that as a nation, we may now have to pay taxes to keep the rest of our population afloat. And we may end up borrowing again to sustain some of our systems. So really the implications are dire, from personal to community through to the nation. We must all work to prevent this, because it has implications on all of us.
Of course, because for these young women to grow and make impact on the growth and development of this country, they need to be well educated and protected if the systems are in place. So finally, before I let you go, I was reading a research on from the UNFPA on adolescent pregnancies. And some of the interviewees from the central region were saying that they see pregnancy or childbirth as pride. So when you're young and you do not have a child, and your other colleagues, or, other 16, 18-year-old girls have children, you're seen as infertile. So the question then is, are we doing enough to increase awareness, educate these young women well enough to change their perception on how they see some of these things, like childbirth at a young age, as something prideful to indulge in? Are we doing enough?
I am tempted to say we are not doing enough, because, like you mentioned, there are several levels of awareness creation. There's one level of, are we doing enough to inform the young people to make informed decisions about their sexual and reproductive health? Which I say no. I say no because our curriculum to inform young people in schools, because that is where majority of them are, is still scattered, and it's still not comprehensive enough, and it is not informative enough and practical enough to inform them to make informed decisions about their health. And if you realize also, the parenting systems, because of norms, is also failing young people. And so they get first contact of information from their peers, sometimes misinformed, practice misinformed information and get pregnant. So we are failing them in that light, as parents, as teachers, as school systems, but also as a community. Because what you just told me about a system that orients young people to believe that they must get pregnant in a certain community, is not that young person's fault. It's a system that has oriented them. So the social fabric has to be also engaged. We must engage the norms and make people understand that really getting pregnant at that age is also not something that we want to go by. So how do we ensure that we prevent it? So I dare say again that we must have a system in place to engage our chiefs, traditional leaders, to prevent that. So beyond the central region, there are other communities where these things happen. So how do we engage? So I believe at the family level, community level, we are not doing enough, and it is time to do better to inform young people to take informed decisions about their health.
Thank you so much, Caesar Kaba, who is a health economist and development consultant, who joined me. Thank you so much for sharing insights on the implications of adolescent teenage pregnancies on the development of the country as a whole. We'll take a break now. When we return, there's more on the AM show. Please stay with us.